There is a particular cruelty that does not use its hands. It uses tone. It uses the slight elevation of a chin when addressing someone. It uses the careful placement of the word girl where a name should go. It uses laughter at the wrong moment and silence at the wrong moment and the specific architecture of a room in which certain people are always standing and certain people are always seated. The Emenike family had this cruelty. Not all of them. This is important. Not the old woman at the back of the sitting room who watched everything. Not the quiet husband who had learned, across 30 years of marriage, to become very small in his own house, but the others, the daughter-in-law, Ifeoma and her 2 adult children, Tobena and Adizi, had it in the specific quantity that comes from wealth held long enough that the people around it have become part of the furniture. The compound was in Enugu, large, gated, the kind that announces itself through its walls before you see the house, the walls alone, communicating a level of resources that most of the surrounding streets did not have access to. Inside, the main house was 3 stories. There was a smaller guest house, a boys' quarters, a garden that was maintained by a man who came twice a week and left without speaking to anyone. Mama Nena Emenike, the old woman, had lived in this compound for 51 years. She had come into it as a young bride, and she had watched it become everything it was, and she had outlived her husband, Chief Emenike, by 12 years, and she moved through the compound, now with the specific quality of a very old tree. She had been there before the house was built, and she would be there after many things about it had changed. She was 81 years old. She sat in her corner of the sitting room in the mornings and she watched. This was largely what she did now watch. Her eyes were still sharp. Her mind was still sharper. But her body had made its negotiations with time, and the negotiations had produced a woman who moved slowly and spoke rarely, and when she did speak, said things with a precision that occasionally stopped conversations and occasionally started them in entirely new directions. She had a granddaughter, had past tense. The granddaughter's name had been Adana, the first child of her eldest son, Emeka, born 26 years ago in this compound. In the room at the end of the second-floor corridor, on a night that Mama Nena described every year on the anniversary, because the describing was the only form of presence available to her now. Adana had been taken, not the word the family used. The family used lost. She was lost. Mama Nena lost her grandchild. The child was lost, as if Adana had wandered into tall grass and simply not come back. What had happened was this. Adana had been 3 years old when her mother, Emeka's first wife, a woman named Obiageli, who was never spoken of in this house and whose portrait had been removed from the walls before the second wife arrived, had taken the child and disappeared. A domestic dispute, a marriage that had become something no one in the house admitted it had become. Obiageli had left in the night with Adana and had not been found. Emeka had died 6 years later, a heart attack, without finding his daughter. Mama Nena had been looking for 23 years. Not with investigators. Now the investigators had been exhausted long. Ego with the particular vigilance of an old woman who had never stopped believing that her granddaughter was alive somewhere and that the world, which was not as large as it pretended, would eventually produce her. She had one piece of evidence that she held onto with the tenacity of a woman who refused to let the most important thing she knew become something she only half remembered. A birthmark, small crescent-shaped, on the left side of the ear. Emeka had had it. She had had it, a smaller version, faded now with age, still visible if you knew where to look. It ran in the family, the way certain things run in families, not every generation, but reliably enough that she had told every person who would listen. If you ever see a young woman of approximately this age with a small crescent birthmark on the left side of her neck, call me. Do not ask questions. Just call me. She had told this to her church women, to the market women she still occasionally visited, to her doctor, to the family's driver. She had told everyone she could reach. And then she had sat in her corner of the sitting room and watched and waited, with the patience that only the very old and the very faithful can sustain. The new housemaid arrived on a Monday morning. Her name was Ifeoma. She was 23 years old. She had come from Onitsha on a recommendation, from a placement agency, a recommendation that described her as reliable. hardworking, experienced, and quiet. The last quality was the one that had recommended her most strongly to Ifeoma, who had specific ideas about the appropriate volume level of the people who worked in her house. She was brought to the sitting room to be introduced to the household. Ifeoma received her from the armchair in the way that Ifeoma received most things, with a slight elevation of the chin and the expression of someone performing an assessment they had already completed in advance. "You are Ifeoma," she said. Not a greeting. A categorization. "Yes, ma. You will address me as madam. Not ma. Not auntie, not anything else, madam. Yes, madam." Taubena, Ifeoma's son, 28, with his mother's chin and his mother's instinct for hierarchy, looked up from his phone long enough to examine Ifeoma with the specific look of a person deciding how much acknowledgement something deserves. He decided not much. He looked back at his phone. Ade's 25. Her mother's daughter, in every way that her mother was not warm, said nothing. She looked at Ifeoma's clothes, made an assessment of their quality, and returned to her conversation with someone on her own phone. Ifeoma stood in the center of the sitting room and received all of this with the composed stillness of a young woman who had been in enough households to know when she had arrived in a difficult one and had decided before she arrived that difficult was not the same as impossible. She was not ashamed. She was not intimidated. She was, and this was the quality that Mama Nena, in her corner, registered immediately, simply present, fully, quietly, uncommonly present. But that was not what made Mama Nena go still. What made Mama Nena go still was when Ifeoma turned her head slightly to receive the instruction Ifeoma was delivering about which room she was responsible for, turned her head at a specific angle so that the left side of her neck was directly visible in the morning light that came through the sitting room window, and Mama Nena saw it, small, crescent-shaped, just below the left ear. The old woman's hands resting in her lap went completely motionless. Her eyes, which had been watchful and patient for 81 years, became something else, became certain. She did not speak, not then. She had waited 23 years. She could wait another hour. She sat in her corner and she looked at the young woman standing in the center of the sitting room receiving instructions from a family that had already decided what she was worth. And she thought, "I have been waiting for you." The first weeks established the household's pattern with Ifeoma, clearly and without ambiguity. Ifeoma's management style was the management style of someone who had confused authority with its performance, the requests given in a tone that was permanently slightly dissatisfied, the corrections delivered in front of other people, the occasional comment on the quality of Ifeoma's work that was phrased as observation but landed as diminishment. Taubena occasionally made remarks never directly cruel, always at the edge of what could be disputed, the specific kind of comment that cannot be challenged because it is phrased as humor, and challenging it only makes you seem like someone who cannot take a joke. Adais ignored her in the particular way that is its own kind of cruelty, the looking through, the speaking about in the third person while the person is present, the casual commandeering of her time without acknowledgement. Ifeoma managed all of it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided that the work mattered and the commentary did. She cooked excellently. She cleaned thoroughly. She was punctual with a precision that seemed almost pointed, as if her timeliness was a kind of argument she was making without words. She did not complain. She did not show them her pain, and she kept, in the inside pocket of the small bag she carried everywhere, a photograph, worn and soft from long handling, a photograph that she had carried since she was old enough to carry things deliberately given to her by her mother, Obiageli, in the last weeks of her mother's life, with the words, "You come from somewhere, Ifeoma. I could not give you everything, but I could give you the truth of where you come from. One day it will matter." The photograph showed a man, perhaps 35, broad-shouldered, a compound visible behind him. On the left side of his neck she had noticed it as a child, had traced it with her small finger when her mother first showed her the photograph, had understood even at 10 years old that the mark on the neck in the photograph was the same mark on her own neck, a small crescent. Her mother had told her his name, Emeka Emenike. She had told her that he did not know Ifeoma existed in the form she had become, that he had known Adana, the 3-year-old who left in the night, but not Ifeoma, the 23-year-old, who had grown from that child across a life lived elsewhere. She had told her he was gone, that he had died before she was old enough to find him. But she had also told her, there is a grandmother. She is still there. She has been looking. Ifeoma had carried this for 3 years since her mother's death. She had found the placement agency. She had asked specifically for a position in Enugu. She had waited for what was available. She had arrived at this compound on a Monday morning and stood in the center of a sitting room, where a family who did not know her had already decided what she was, and she had turned her head at a specific angle and waited, not for Kioma, not for Tabena, not for Ades, for the old woman in the corner. She had come here deliberately. She had carried a photograph and a birthmark and 3 years of patience. And in the corner of the sitting room, an 81-year-old woman had seen what she came to be seen by, and what these two women do next quietly, carefully, with the specific intelligence of people who understand that truth is a serious thing that requires serious handling will change. Everything in that compound. Everything. Mama Nena did not approach Ifeoma that first day. She did not approach her the second day either. She watched. She watched the way Ifeoma moved through the house, the efficiency of it, the care. She watched the way she absorbed Kioma's corrections without collapse. She watched the way she held herself not with the defeated posture of someone who had accepted diminishment as their permanent condition, but with something more deliberate. The posture of someone enduring something temporarily, someone with a destination. On the 4th day, Mama Nena called her. Not loudly. She did not call loudly anymore. She simply looked at Ifeoma across the sitting room when the others had gone out and tapped the chair beside her with one finger. Ifeoma came and sat. The old woman looked at her for a long moment with those sharp, certain eyes. "What is your full name?" she asked. Ifeoma Obiageli. The name Obiageli landed in Mama Nena's chest like a stone dropped. In still water, the impact felt, rather than heard, the ripples moving outward through everything. She was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's name," she said carefully, "was also Obiageli." Ifeoma looked at her, and in her eyes Mama Nena saw it clearly. The thing she had been watching for was not the surprise of coincidence but the recognition of arrival. "Yes," Ifeoma said quietly. "My mother's name was Obiageli Emenike. She died 3 years ago." A pause. "She told me to find you." The sitting room was completely still. Somewhere outside, the garden bird that called every morning was calling. A generator hummed in a distant compound. Ordinary Lagos continued around a moment that was not ordinary at all. Mama Nena reached out and put her hand on the left side of Ifeoma's neck. Her old fingers found the crescent mark. They rested there for a moment. Then she closed her eyes, and when she opened them there were tears, moving down the deep lines of her 81-year-old face, not in a rush but slowly, with the specific gravity of water that has been held for a very long time. "Adana," she said. A whisper. The name she had spoken every year on an anniversary for 23 years. "My mother called me Ifeoma," the young woman said gently. "But yes," a pause. "I think that is also who I am." The old woman took her hand. She held it with a grip that was stronger than her age suggested. The grip of someone who has found something they were never going to let go of again. "You are home," Mama Nena said. "You are finally home." They did not tell Kioma immediately. This was Mama Nena's decision, and it was, as her decisions tended to be, precise and intentional. She told Ifeoma, "We need documents first. We need the truth in a form that cannot be argued with, because what is coming when we tell them will be argued with. I know this family." Ifeoma nodded. She had been prepared for this. Her mother had prepared her for this. She had brought what she had. The photograph of Emeka with the matching birthmark. Her mother's handwritten account pages of it. Dated and signed. Written in the last months of Obiageli's life when she had understood that she was running out of time and that the account needed to exist in a form that would survive her. Documents from Ifeoma's birth that carried her father's name. A church record from Onitsha where Obiageli had registered the child after leaving Enugu. Mama Nena held each document in her old hands and read it with the focused attention of someone for whom every word was both evidence and gift. She called her lawyer on the 5th day. Ifeoma came and sat. The old woman looked at her for a long moment with those sharp, certain eyes. "What is your full name?" she asked. "Ifeoma Obiageli." The name Obiageli landed in Mama Nena's chest like a stone dropped. In still water, the impact felt, rather than heard, the ripples moving outward through everything. She was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's name," she said carefully, "was also Obiageli." Ifeoma looked at her, and in her eyes Mama Nena saw it clearly. The thing she had been watching for was not the surprise of coincidence but the recognition of arrival. "Yes," Ifeoma said quietly. "My mother's name was Obiageli Emenike. She died 3 years ago." A pause. "She told me to find you." The sitting room was completely still. Somewhere outside, the garden bird that called every morning was calling. A generator hummed in a distant compound. Ordinary Lagos continued around a moment that was not ordinary at all. Mama Nena reached out and put her hand on the left side of Ifeoma's neck. Her old fingers found the crescent mark. They rested there for a moment. Then she closed her eyes, and when she opened them there were tears, moving down the deep lines of her 81-year-old face, not in a rush but slowly, with the specific gravity of water that has been held for a very long time. "Adana," she said. A whisper. The name she had spoken every year on an anniversary for 23 years. "My mother called me Ifeoma," the young woman said gently. "But yes," a pause. "I think that is also who I am." The old woman took her hand. She held it with a grip that was stronger than her age suggested. The grip of someone who has found something they were never going to let go of again. "You are home," Mama Nena said. "You are finally home." They did not tell Kioma immediately. This was Mama Nena's decision, and it was, as her decisions tended to be, precise and intentional. She told Ifeoma, "We need documents first. We need the truth in a form that cannot be argued with, because what is coming when we tell them will be argued with. I know this family." Ifeoma nodded. She had been prepared for this. Her mother had prepared her for this. She had brought what she had. The photograph of Emeka with the matching birthmark. Her mother's handwritten account pages of it. Dated and signed. Written in the last months of Obiageli's life when she had understood that she was running out of time and that the account needed to exist in a form that would survive her. Documents from Ifeoma's birth that carried her father's name. A church record from Onitsha where Obiageli had registered the child after leaving Enugu. Mama Nena held each document in her old hands and read it with the focused attention of someone for whom every word was both evidence and gift. She called her lawyer on the 5th day. She also called her doctor, who performed a DNA test, one of the new kinds, quick and definitive between Mama Nena and Ifeoma. She did all of this quietly, while Ifeoma continued to cook and clean and receive Chioma's corrections and Tobena's remarks and Adaisy's studied invisibility. She did this because she was 81 years old and she had learned that the most powerful move is the one your opponent does not know you are making. The morning she chose to speak was a Sunday. The household was assembled for the weekly family breakfast that Mama Nena had insisted upon for 30 years, in which the family attended because contradicting Mama Nena at breakfast was one of the few things in the Emenike compound that nobody had ever been willing to attempt. Chioma was at the head of the table in her husband's absence. Her husband was in the sitting room, as he often was, performing the small disappearing act that had kept him intact across 30 years. Tobena was on his phone. Adayes was eating with the distracted elegance of someone doing you a favor by being present. Ifeoma was in the kitchen, preparing the next course. Mama Nena sat at her end of the table. She waited until the table had settled into its ordinary Sunday rhythm. Then she said quietly, in the way she said everything, with the authority that required no volume, "I want everyone to be still for a moment." Something in the quality of her voice produced immediate stillness. This was, everyone at the table understood without being able to explain it, not ordinary Sunday breakfast conversation. Chioma set down her cup. Tobena put his phone face down. Adais looked up. "I want Ifeoma to come in," Mama Nena said. Mama Chioma started. "Please call her." The please was the kind of please that was not a request. Ifeoma was called. She came in from the kitchen and stood at the edge of the dining room, the edge. Again, the threshold, with the composed stillness that had been her posture in this house since the first day. Mama Nena looked at her across the table. Then she looked at her family. This young woman, she said, whose name you have been saying incorrectly since she arrived, it is Ifeoma. Not girl, not you, is the granddaughter I have been looking for since before some of you were born. The table went very still. Her name was Adana when she left this compound 23 years ago. She was 3 years old. Her mother took her and I have been looking ever since. She paused. She found us. She came here deliberately. She has been standing in this house for 2 weeks while you look at Kioma. That was brief and absolute. Treated her the way you treat things that do not matter to you. Chioma's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I have documents, Mama Nena continued. I have a DNA result that confirms what I have known since the moment she turned her head on Monday morning and I saw the mark her father carried, and his father, before him and I before him. She touched the faded crescent below her own ear. I have a lawyer who will be here on Tuesday, and I want everyone at this table to understand clearly now, before Tuesday, that this young woman is Amika's daughter. She is my son's child. She is the first grandchild of this house, and she will be treated as such. She looked at Ifeoma. Come and sit down, she said. Simply. You have been standing long enough. What happened in the days that followed was not clean or simple. Chioma's reaction moved through disbelief, then anger, then the specific calculation of a woman assessing what a new reality meant for her own position. She challenged the documents. She challenged the DNA results. She said things that were understandable from a woman who felt the ground shifting, and less understandable from a woman who had been watching a young person be diminished in her own house for 2 weeks. Tabena was quieter than his mother, which surprised some people and did not surprise Mama Nena, who had always believed he was better than his worst behavior and was waiting to see if this moment would confirm that. Adais wept, not from malice and not from joy, from the complicated feeling of someone whose family has just expanded in a direction she had not prepared for and who was not yet sure what she felt about it. The lawyer came on Tuesday. The documents were reviewed. The DNA results were presented. The legal reality of Ifeoma's position as the legitimate child of Emeka Emenike, with all that entailed in terms of the estate and the family name, was laid out. With the precision that legal realities require, Ifeoma sat through all of it. With the same composed stillness she had brought to the kitchen and the corrections, and the remarks and the looking through. She did not perform triumph. She did not inventory what was owed to her. She did not make anyone feel small in the way that she herself had been made to feel small. She simply sat in the room that was hers by blood and right and waited for the world to arrange itself around the truth. The day that stayed with her longest was not the Sunday breakfast, not the lawyer's visit, not the moment when even Kioma finally ran out of challenges and sat in her armchair in a kind of depleted silence. It was a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the Sunday breakfast. Mama Nena had asked her to come to her room, the room at the back of the compound that the old woman had occupied for 51 years, with its photographs and its smell of camphor and old wood and the specific atmosphere of a room that has held the same person for so long it has become an extension of them. She sat Ifeoma on the bed beside her. She took out a small box. Inside the box, a photograph, larger than the one Ifeoma carried, clearer. A man of 35 with a broad smile, standing in the compound that Ifeoma now moved through every day. On the left side of his neck, the mark. This is your father, Mama Nena said. His name was Amika. He was the most stubborn person I have ever known and the best person I have ever known, and those two things were connected. She looked at the photograph. He looked for you. Until the day he died, he looked for you. I want you to know that. Ifeoma looked at the photograph. She looked at the face of the man whose mark she carried on her neck. The man she had never met, who had never stopped looking. Did he know she started? He knew you existed, Mama Nena said. He knew you were alive somewhere. He did not know who you had become. She looked at Ifeoma with those eyes that had seen 51 years of this compound. But I know. I have watched you for 2 weeks. And I know. A pause. He would have been so proud Ifeoma put the photograph down on the bed, and then she did what she had not permitted herself to do in 2 weeks of being looked through and spoken, past and categorized and diminished. She wept, completely, without management, the weeping of a girl who had grown up with half a family, and a photograph and a birthmark, and a mother's careful words, and had spent 23 years of her life as Adana, who was now Ifeoma, and had finally, at 23, in a room that smelled of camphor and old wood, arrived at the other half. Mama Nena held her, not with the grip of someone performing comfort, but with the grip of someone who had been waiting 81 years to hold this specific person and intended to hold her properly, now that she finally could. Outside, the evening birds called in the compound trees. Inside, a grandmother and granddaughter sat together for the first time, and the world, which had been wrong for 23 years, was a little more right. She came to a house that did not know her. She stood in the center of a sitting room and let a family, who had already decided what she was worth, look at her and decide. She cooked their food. She cleaned their floors. She received their remarks and their looking through and their careful architecture of diminishment. And in the corner of the room, an 81-year-old woman who had been waiting 23 years looked at the left side of her neck. And everything changed. Not because of the money. Not because of the documents or the lawyer or the DNA. Because a grandmother never stopped looking. Because a mother in her last weeks wrote the truth down on paper and gave it to her daughter. And said, one day this will matter. Because a young woman carried a photograph and a birthmark and a name across 23 years and arrived at the right compound and turned her head at the right angle. Real power is never loud. It simply endures until a grandmother sees what she has been waiting to see and says, come and sit down. You have been standing long enough. This has been Royal Village Tales, where every story reminds you that real power is never loud. It simply endures.